My name is Ava, and I am 34 years old, living with my husband, James. We both work for the company that my father-in-law founded. Though my father-in-law has retired, he single-handedly grew a small construction company into a $250 billion annual revenue enterprise. He even acquired rival construction companies, and while he may have been forceful at times, everyone admires his incredible business acumen. James, who was chosen to follow in his father's footsteps, was raised as a pampered child and has a gentle character that I fear doesn't hold up in the harsh world of business. While gentle may sound nice, in reality, he's incredibly indecisive, and I've started to feel he isn't fit to be a husband, let alone a CEO. James has even admitted, "I'm not cut out to be a CEO. I'll probably just be a figurehead if I become one. It's easier for me that way." Showing no real intention of seriously taking over the company. We've been married for 5 years, and lately I've grown frustrated with his lack of initiative. In contrast to James, I consider myself to be quite decisive, and it seems my father-in-law during his active years appreciated this about me and delegated various tasks to me. Before marrying James, I worked at a bank, so I am used to managing finances and always have the numbers in mind while working. When I got married, I quit my job at the bank and planned to become a full-time homemaker. However, my father-in-law requested that I work for the construction company instead. Shortly after I began working, my father-in-law started inviting me to participate in board meetings and sought my opinion on management matters. At first, the board members seemed skeptical about including the founder's daughter-in-law in important meetings. But as I consistently provided relevant insights, they started listening to my suggestions. Although James was also a board member, he rarely attended meetings, and this was accepted by the other board members and my father-in-law as the norm. When I returned home from a meeting one day, I found James nonchalantly watching TV. "Why didn't you attend today's meeting?" I asked angrily. "You're a key member. You should take it seriously." Without showing any remorse, he retorted, "Even if I attend, I don't really understand the discussions. Besides, the board members prefer you, so there's no problem, right?" I wondered if he was irritated by my participation in board meetings, so he made such remarks. My father-in-law has been teaching me the intricacies of running the business and seems to be grooming me as his successor. I've started enjoying being involved in management, and before I knew it, I was working hard to meet my father-in-law's expectations. About 2 years after I started attending meetings, my father-in-law retired completely. When there were major decisions to be made, the board members would consult me, while James was sidelined. I had hoped that being in such a situation would spur James to work harder, but instead, he became even more disengaged from his work. Although he would come to the office in the morning, he'd disappear somewhere by noon and just stay home for the rest of the day. When he saw me at home, he wouldn't talk about work at all, seemingly indifferent to the company's affairs. Meanwhile, my workload at the company was increasing, and I was getting busier. After my father-in-law's retirement, the board members relied on me more and more, and I was tasked with duties akin to a CEO's. Given that we're a large company with many employees, I've been committed to increasing sales and profits for the sake of our workers. With the hard work of our employees, our sales began to grow. I found running the company more interesting and became more engrossed in my work. Conversely, my husband James seemed to be losing interest in his work, and his appearances at the company began to diminish. The conversation between us at home had lessened, and our relationship began to become tense. Around that time, "I ran into your sister Megan today, and we had lunch together." James came home and casually mentioned, "My sister Megan is 2 years older than me and had just divorced about 6 months ago. The cause of her divorce was infidelity on her part, which led to a big commotion when her enraged husband stormed our parents' home. So my husband, James, went to my parents' house to calm down Megan's husband in my place since I was busy with work. James, who had a gentle upbringing and a calming personality, managed to convince Megan's raging husband to leave for the time being. Later, Megan told me, "Your husband is really something. He handled my raging husband so effortlessly." She praised James. Megan's husband, in his anger, must have been disarmed by James's calm and easygoing demeanor. Megan was able to divorce her husband after paying alimony, but since this incident, she seemed to look at James differently. Until then, she seemed to have thought of James, who was not particularly attractive and is indecisive, as just a rich, pampered son. But after the incident, she seemed to believe he was a respectable business owner. Megan, now single after her divorce, probably saw James as a great catch, as she always loved wealthy men. But I, who was engrossed in work, could not imagine such a thing. Of course, my sis wouldn't have known that James is just a nominal executive who doesn't actually manage the company. Megan's ex-husband was an elite employee of a foreign company and bragged to me at their wedding. "My husband is an excellent employee with a high salary, and on top of that, he's handsome. You're jealous, aren't you?" Her ex-husband was handsome, smart, and carried a stylish vibe. I couldn't understand why she would cheat on such a wonderful husband. 3 months after hearing from James that he had lunch with Megan, I returned home to find James unusually serious. "Ava, I have something to discuss." It was the first time I had heard such words from him, and I had a bad premonition. With my heart pounding, I waited for him to speak. "Actually, Megan is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce." I was shocked by the request for a divorce, but even more surprised to hear that Megan was pregnant. At a loss for words, James continued. "Megan is planning to come over on our next day off to discuss this, so I'm counting on you," he said, stunned. I asked him, "So you want to marry my sis?" With a troubled look, James responded, "It's not that I want to marry her, but if she's having my baby, I guess I have no choice." I sighed at James's typical indecisiveness and replied, "Well, if she's carrying your baby, I suppose it can't be helped. Let's discuss this when she comes over." It seemed like my husband and I couldn't make any decisions together, so I decided to meet directly with my sister to figure things out. Even though I had already made up my mind to divorce in my heart, I thought I needed to consult my father-in-law about the company's situation. As the daughter-in-law of the founder, I was involved in running the business, but if I divorced, I would become a stranger. The next day, I went to my in-laws' house and told my father-in-law exactly what my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was present, was thrilled that her son had a child, but she quieted down when glared at by my father-in-law. For my mother-in-law, she seemed to be more concerned about her grandchild than the company's management. After some thought, my father-in-law said with a smile, "Ava, I want you to continue to be involved in the company's management, as you have been. I don't care about James. I'll take the responsibility, so let him do as he likes." It seems that my father-in-law values the management of the company more than his son or grandchild. Even though he has retired, my father-in-law, as the founder, still has a strong voice in the company, and most of the company's shares are held by him, so there are no executives who go against his will. I was also getting interested in my work, so I was reluctant to give up now. Now that my job was settled, it was time to discuss the future with my sister. On my day off, my sister came to my house with a big smile and said, "Ava, it's a pity you couldn't have a baby. Haha, I'll give you plenty of consolidation money. Please leave this house immediately." She said it with a triumphant air. My husband, who was just silently listening to our sister's conversation without saying anything. Despite being the one who caused the problem, I was appalled at my husband's indifferent face, and I said, "It's okay to get divorced, but there's also the issue of alimony and division of property, so let's bring in a lawyer and decide properly. I never thought of you, my sister, would fall for a man like James. I retorted to my sister with irony. My sister glared at me with a stern face for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. I finally realized it. It's not about looks and men. It's about the inside. It was funny to hear my sister talk, as if she fully understood my husband's inner self, and I said, holding back my laughter, "That's great, isn't it? From now on, live happily with James." The inner self my sister was talking about might be money. She seemed to have been under the impression that my husband was the president of my father-in-law's company, but it didn't seem like she had heard anything from him. When the discussion was over, my sister said she would start living here and brought a moving company, so I only took out the necessary items. Knowing my quick-tempered sister, I had already arranged for a new apartment. I also hired a lawyer and had documents prepared for the division of property and claims for alimony. The next day, after moving out my belongings, I started negotiations for alimony and division of property with my husband and sister, accompanied by my lawyer. My husband was still present that day, sitting with an indifferent face, and only my sister was speaking. "As I said before, I'm willing to pay as much alimony as you want, so please decide at your convenience." Hearing my sister's words, my lawyer decided to also claim alimony against my sister, in addition to my husband. My sister is still paying alimony in installments to her ex-husband, so my lawyer had said in advance that it might be impossible to claim alimony from her. But since she said she would pay me as much as she wanted, I decided to make a claim. When it came to negotiations about the division of property, my sister excitedly said, "This mansion is originally James's family's, so it shouldn't be part of the division of property, right?" The lawyer answered my sister emotionlessly, "This building and the land belong to the company, so it's up to the company to decide." It seemed like even my husband thought this house belonged to his father. "Is that so? I thought this house was Dad's," he casually asked. My sister, on the other hand, was taken aback and attacked the lawyer. Wait a minute! So does that mean I can't live in this house?" The lawyer responded in a businesslike manner. "Since it's company property, you can continue to live here if the company allows it." At this comment, my sister seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "Oh, you should have said that earlier. It'll be fine since James, the president, will be living here." The lawyer looked surprised for a moment, then burst into laughter. "What are you talking about? Ava is the president, not James." Looking at my sister, who was planning to remarry my husband, and yet didn't even know that fact, made me laugh. My sister immediately turned to my husband and yelled, "Huh? James, you're not the president?" I stepped in for my husband, who looked troubled, and explained to my sister, "James is merely an advisor, without any executive rights. I'm an executive director, but I was also made president. Our father-in-law, the founder, had always been the president, but when he retired, he made me an executive director, and even the president. The other executives also appreciated my performance, and there was no opposition. On the other hand, my husband, thanks to his father's arrangement, was receiving an executive salary as an advisor without executive rights, which is more of a pity than a mere employee. Even though it's called an executive salary, since he wasn't really doing any work, it was less than what an ordinary employee would get. So I was bearing all the living expenses. My husband, who didn't care about our household finances, didn't even care whether the house he was living in was company-owned or belonged to his father. Although our home was company-owned, my responsible father-in-law had always charged me rent, so I thought of it as a normal rental property. The lawyer, still laughing, asked me, "Can we continue to rent this house to James?" My sister reacted to the rent part of the lawyer's question. "What do you mean by rent? Are you suggesting that I take rent from James? Isn't it the company's property? Just make it free." The lawyer presented the rent amount, laughing heartily at her words. She was shocked to see the figure, and so was her husband James, who seemed to be hearing about it for the first time. "Guess a house this big does have a high rent. I can't afford that with my salary." His executive compensation would barely leave any money behind if he had to pay that rent. Their living expenses would be hard to cover. During the 5 years of their marriage, James had used up all his modest executive compensation. My salary also disappeared in high rent and living expenses. There were hardly any assets left, and splitting the savings was the only way for asset division. After the lawyer left, my sister, who now knew that the mansion she had been hoping for was actually rented, seemed utterly deflated, staring blankly. James was grinning as usual. I suggested, "Why don't we vacate this place and go back to your parents' house? Your mother was so happy about the pregnancy news." James agreed, but I laughed at the thought of why I had to consider this man, who was about to be my ex, this much. I started worrying whether this unreliable man could raise a child, but I decided to leave it as it was none of my business. I asked my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony, "Are you okay with the alimony payment, sis? You seemed pretty confident, but you're also paying your ex-husband, right?" She was stunned to hear this, her face suddenly snapping back to reality. "Alimony? I have to pay it too?" She was astonished, seemingly having heard nothing of the discussion earlier in the day. "You said, 'I'll give plenty of alimony,' but you weren't expecting me to pay it, right? My salary's really low." James and my sister exchanged surprised glances. Though not a lawyer, watching these two made me want to burst into laughter. I had already obtained signatures on the divorce papers and alimony request documents, so it didn't matter to me. But seeing James and my sister like this was pathetic. My ex-husband, who had remarried my sister, had returned to his parents' home, just as I had warned. But there seemed to be constant quarrels between my sister and my in-laws. The main cause of the conflict was the lie about my sister being pregnant with my ex-husband's child. His mother, who was hoping for an heir, was extremely angry. My father-in-law, who had disliked my sister for stealing his son from me from the very beginning, hadn't even spoken to her. He fronted the alimony for James, and I was paid in full, but my sister, seeing this, pleaded with him. "Dad, could you please pay my alimony as well?" To this, the father-in-law responded, "I have no reason to be called Dad by you." He was fuming. Not being able to obtain anything she had hoped for, my sister ran away from my ex-husband's family home without a word and went missing. She had practically remarried the ex-husband just to bear the burden of alimony, which was utterly foolish. My ex-husband seemed to consider getting back with me, but his father scolded him. "You're the kind of man who should never even think about having a family. You can't even take care of yourself properly." I wouldn't get back with my ex-husband, even if he begged me. I had stopped believing in him when he cheated on me with my sister, and I was disgusted by his indifferent attitude during our discussions. He was dismissed from his executive position and is now working as a temporary employee. I've continued being the CEO, which is the core things in my life. I don't even think about remarrying someone. After the breakup, I've kept in touch with my father-in-law, receiving advice when needed. For now, I want to focus on the company, thinking of it as being married to it for the sake of my employees.
My name is Amy Clark, a 28-year-old office worker. Currently, I work at my father's construction company. I'm getting married soon. The groom-to-be is George Brown, a classmate from college who confessed his feelings to me. We started dating and now we live together. George works at a company in New York City, while I work at my father's local company. He commutes by train, but I use a car to commute. Now, with our wedding just 3 months away, I'm spending my days busy with preparations. George usually gets home around 7 p.m., so I take care of our meals. On his days off, George helps by cleaning our apartment and the bathroom. I love cars, especially driving them. Because of my father's company, I even have a crane license. Despite standing at only 5'1" and having a baby face, I often surprise people when I operate a crane at a construction site in my work clothes. But I find it amusing to see their reactions. One day, I was about to drive out for shopping. Accompanying me was my best friend, Megan Flynn. We've been best friends since elementary school and even went to the same college. She's a confidant with whom I can share anything. we planned to visit a recently opened outlet mall in the next state, which was a bit far, but we thought it would be a nice drive. I headed to the convenience store where we decided to meet up and met Megan there. "Sorry to keep you waiting. Did you wait long?" "No, I just bought a coffee. Want some, Amy?" Megan's coffee looked tasty, so I took her up on the offer. "Thanks. Could you grab one for me too? I'll set the navigation system." "Okay." Happily obliging, Megan went back into the convenience store. I began to set up the car's GPS and accidentally pressed the history button. "Darn it, this touch panel is so sensitive," I muttered, trying to switch the screen back. But then I noticed a surprising entry in the history. The name was Hotel Lovely Chateau. What's this? Of course, I'd never searched for such a thing before. This is my car, but George occasionally uses it too. George must have used it. Well, no biggie, I thought, not paying much attention to it at the time, and continued setting my destination. Today, Megan and I were heading towards an outlet mall that just opened in the neighboring state, which is a bit of a drive away. We quickly got on the highway. The weather was great, making for a pleasant drive. Near an exit ramp, Megan suddenly pointed out, Look, Lovely Chateau Hotel. What a cheesy name for a hotel these days. Lovely Chateau? The hotel from the search history earlier? While driving, I couldn't take a good look, but there was indeed a big sign saying Lovely Chateau Hotel. That's indeed cheesy. We laughed together, but I couldn't help but feel a bit concerned because of its name in the search history. After finishing our shopping with Megan and dropping her home, I returned home alone. Once I arrived home, I checked the car navigation system again. Lovely Chateau Hotel. As I searched the name, it indeed showed the location near that exit ramp. It was definitely that hotel. It was undeniably one of those types of hotels. I couldn't help but wonder why George had searched for that hotel. I decided to keep a close eye on George's activities. I decided to install a dash cam in my car. I discussed it with George and he agreed, saying, "Why not? A lot of people have them these days. It's good for safety, too. But in return, you have to pay for it, Amy. It's your car after all," he said. Although the car is in my name, George also uses it, so he ended up contributing a bit to the cost. The next day, after work, I drove straight to the dealership and had a dash cam installed. The dash cam comes with cameras facing the front and back, and one that records the interior of the car. The recording time is 5 hours, after which it overwrites previous footage. I also decided to add a GPS logger while I was at it. This device records the vehicle's movements via GPS. Then, after George had used the car, I checked the dashcam footage and GPS logger data. I mainly use the car for commuting, so George typically uses it on his days off. Of course, he always asks me for permission in advance. One weekend, George approached me asking, "Can I use the car this Saturday?" "Sure, but where are you going?" I asked. He replied, "I'm planning to go to the shopping mall you went to last week. A friend wants to check it out." Who's his friend?" "Just a colleague from work. Lives pretty close by." "Is this friend a woman?" "No way, man. He's a buff guy, even bulkier than me." All right then. Bring me back a souvenir." "Gotcha, Amy. I bet you'd like something edible." "Yeah, I'd love something sweet." "All right, got it." Then came the weekend. As planned, George left on Saturday and returned in the evening. I had been waiting for him to come back, and I used the excuse of having left something in the car to go and retrieve the memory card and the GPS logger. After George went to bed, I checked the data from the GPS logger and the memory card. The GPS logger showed he did go to the shopping mall. However, it also revealed that he had taken a detour on the way back, exiting at an interchange. Upon enlarging the location, it was the Lovely Chateau Hotel. This seemed completely suspicious. Our wedding is next month, and now this? My fingers were trembling as I operated the device. This was already a huge shock, but I composed myself and checked the memory card. I inserted it into the computer and played back the recorded content. Suddenly, a strange woman appeared on the screen, sitting in the passenger seat. She was quite flashy with long hair and seemed pretty. She appeared to be older than me, but her occasional smile was somewhat childish. Unable to think straight, I just stared at the screen, completely shocked. The conversation was also recorded. "Really, you're such a bad boy. You're getting married next month and you're still doing things like this?" She laughed. "It's all good. The reason I'm marrying her is because her dad's the boss. He's a construction contractor, but he's loaded." George's voice resonated from the playback. "Oh, but once you're married, doesn't that mean we're over?" "No way, you're the real deal for me. I plan on divorcing her after a year or so. Of course, I'll make it look like she's the bad one and I'll grab a hefty alimony and her parents' wealth. After that, I'll be with you." Wait a whole year? No, we'll continue this relationship in the meantime. I can't bear to be away from you even for a day. That makes me happy. I love you, George. I love you too, Grace. I stopped the playback. I couldn't watch it any further. George had been unfaithful, cheating, and he was marrying me just to take over my father's company? The proposal he made, the birthday we spent at the Seaview Hotel, everything was a farce. Why? Tears blurred my view of the computer screen. The next day, I told him I had to prepare for the wedding, so I would be going back to my parents' home for a while. George replied without much thought, "Okay." Perhaps he was even pleased that I was going to be gone. To my parents, I said, "I feel a bit nervous and I want to stay with you guys for a bit. Please, let me cool off." They seemed to think I was having pre-wedding jitters. They welcomed me back happily. After a couple of days passed, I received a message from my best friend, Megan. I felt I could tell Megan the truth. I told Megan everything. Megan said, "Okay, I'll come over tonight. Let's drink until dawn." Despite her cute face, Megan had some boyish qualities, but I loved that about her. I told my parents that it was a last-minute bachelorette party. Soon enough, Megan showed up with bags full of drinks and snacks. "Mom, I'm borrowing Amy for the night. It might get a bit loud, so please bear with us." Megan began cracking jokes as soon as she arrived. "Oh dear, I see you're all chatterboxes, but don't drink too much, okay? I made some stew, so take it and eat it." Her mother thoughtfully prepared some snacks as well. "Wow, thank you. The wonderful smell earlier was the stew, wasn't it? I'll gratefully accept this. Oh, by the way, may I invite another friend over?" "Sure. Go ahead and make it a party that Amy will remember." "Thank you so much." And with that, she called over another friend, Jane. She was a high school classmate. Interestingly, she's a wedding planner at the venue we've booked and will be reuniting as she's overseeing our wedding. She went to the same high school as Megan, and they've met several times, so they're good friends now. The party started with the three of us. I showed the two of them the dash cam footage. Then Megan said, "Oh, I know this person. She's Grace, a junior from our college club. Amy wouldn't know because she wasn't in the club, but both George and I were in the club with her." I was astounded by this revelation. Wait, George's junior? I thought she was older than me. She always seemed mature for her age, but who would have thought it's Grace? She's invited to the wedding. Most of the club members will be there. Megan said while poking a radish from the stew. "But this situation is frustrating, isn't it? I want to get back at her somehow," Jane says, crushing an empty beer can. She's always had a strong sense of justice and even caught a groper during high school, handing him over to the police. She was enraged as if it were her own matter. Accepting Jane's words of revenge, Megan started talking. "Let's ruin the wedding then. I have a plan," Megan said, preparing a piece of paper and starting to write something down. "What do you think, Jane? Your cooperation is essential. Please, help Amy." "Of course. I'm the planner for this wedding, so I can make anything happen." Jane, being the planner, joining our side certainly boosts the success rate of our plan. "Great. You're reliable." "Hey, both of you, you've had too much to drink." And thus the plan was formed. I covered the two of them who fell asleep from drinking too much with blankets and whispered, "Thank you, Megan. Jane." Despite having too much to drink myself, I felt a bit relieved. The next day, I returned to George's place. Several days after I got home, I put my first plan into action. While watching that recorded video, it was Megan who found it. One day after work, I decided to dine out. I met George at the station, drove him to the diner in my car, and we had a meal. And when we got home, I let George out first, and I returned to the room after parking my car. Then I boldly went to the living room and was deeply moved, saying, "George, to prepare something like this for me without even telling me." "Huh?" George made a strange sound in response to my sudden words. "Isn't this a gift for me? I found it in the car." Saying this, I showed George the paper bag containing a luxury brand bag. The brand name was boldly printed on the paper bag. I was going to clear the rear window of the car because it was dirty. When I tried to pull out the cleaning tools from the floor under the rear, this was in there. "Oh, George, you hid it there to surprise me, didn't you?" "Sorry, I found it." I pretended to be innocent and acted even more delighted. No, that is..." George fumbled his words. Do you have someone else to send such a thing to?" "Don't be silly. I have no one but Amy." "Right, you bought it for me, didn't you? How much did this expensive thing cost? Around $2,000? Thanks, honey." Yeah, it's a limited edition, so I think it was $5,000. Well, I thought this would suit Amy, so I bought it. I really intended to surprise you, but, well, it didn't go as planned." "Yes, it seems a bit youthful, but I can still pull it off, right?" "Of course. Any bag would look good on you, Amy." "Hey, that doesn't sound like a compliment." Sorry." "Okay, I'll keep it safe. Thanks a lot." When I heard his last sigh, I could hardly hold back my laughter. In the video from that party, I saw George being urged by Grace to buy a luxury bag, and then confirmed that he had bought a high-end bag and hid it in the floor of the back of the car. I found it, and I got it instead. During dinner later, George was sighing. Serves him right. And a few days later, I got a call from my father. It seems like my father's bad habits have surfaced once again. Believe it or not, he's gone and bought a new car. He's always had a thing for cars, and he's driven quite a few over the years. Apparently, on his way home from work, he pulled over at a used car dealership and spotted a gem of a car he used to admire. On a whim, he bought it right then and there. "Dad, didn't Mom get mad at you?" "Yeah, sure she did, but that's no biggie. Listen to this. It's a discontinued Type R. It's a car I've always wanted. I thought if I let this one slip, I might never get my hands on it, so I bought it on the spot. I can hardly wait to get it delivered." "Really? You never think about the consequences? What you are going to do with your current car?" "Oh, I'll give it to you. It's still in great shape. It can hold its own against the flimsy cars these days." "That hatchback, right? I suppose I have grown a bit tired of the car I've been driving." "Just sell that one. How can you enjoy driving such a weak automatic car?" "But..." That's when it hit me. "Okay, got it. I'll do that. Thanks, Dad." "Yeah, the new car arrives next week. You can pick it up then. I'll have it cleaned for you." "Okay, but this is the last of your indulgences, right, Dad?" "Don't say that. A man's dreams never end." All right, thanks, Dad." I hung up the phone and couldn't help but grin. And so my car changed within a few days. "Amy, did you change your car? This one looks cooler than the last one." "Yeah, my dad bought a new car and gave me his old one. It's cooler than the previous one, isn't it?" "Yeah, it's cool. Lend it to me this Saturday." "Sure, why not?" I felt like a fish had taken the bait. And then came Saturday. George, who had left with the car keys, came back immediately. "Hey, that car." "What's wrong? It won't start?" "No, I can't drive it." "You can't drive it?" Well... What's the matter? You drove it just fine yesterday, didn't you?" That's because it's a stick shift." "So what's the problem with that?" "It's just that I only have an automatic license." "Oh, that's right. I forgot about that." "This is not funny. I can't drive now. That's a problem. I need to be able to drive." "Why is that a problem? Do you want me to drive for you?" No, that's not... I mean, I don't want to spoil your day off." "Really? I don't mind, though." No, I'll figure it out." "All right, then. Safe travels." I knew very well he couldn't. Serves him right. Figure it out. The car I got from my father was a stick shift, There was no problem for me since I have a manual license. However, George only had an automatic license. He legally can't drive that car, and he probably wouldn't know how to drive it anyway. I had already figured out that he's been taking the car on weekly dates. Despite knowing that, I still switched cars. It's my car in my name, and I can do whatever I want with it. Here too, I say, serves him right. Then, with just 1 week to go until our wedding, I received a message and was summoned to a designated location. "Hello, my name is Amy," I greeted. "Oh, Amy, thank you for coming," the other party responded. "Not a problem. So, how did it go?" "Well, please sit down. We'll discuss everything shortly." With that, I was ushered into a meeting room and sat down. "Let's first discuss your request." Yes, this was a private investigation agency. I had requested a background check on George. The subject, George Brown, was definitely in the wrong. We have secured photos and videos. Would you like to see them? "Yes, please." With that, the man pulled out a laptop, inserted a USB drive, and started playing a video. In it, 2 people were playfully walking arm in arm. They entered a hotel. The date and time of the video were from a Saturday afternoon 2 weeks ago. There were also photos of them kissing, embracing, and more. "Thank you, this is enough." I then received the documents and left the office. Honestly, I knew about the affair, but seeing it so blatantly presented was hard. I contacted my friends Megan and Jane and arranged to meet at a pub. I secured a private room, showed them the documents I received earlier, and we started our analysis. "Oh man, this is clear-cut evidence." "This one's quite something too," they chimed. I have lost all sympathy. I'll bring him down completely. With that, I took a big gulp of my beer. "Hey, Amy, could you lend me these?" "Huh? What for, Jane?" "I was already planning to make a slideshow of the bride and groom, so it would be easy to include these." "Okay, all that's left is to get ready for the big day." With that, Megan raised her beer mug and gave me a toast. "To us. Let's give it our all." I was so touched that everyone was going all out for me that I felt like crying, but I held it back. And so the big day finally arrived. The day of the wedding. It was a hectic morning, busy to say the least. Upon arriving at the wedding venue, I was immediately ushered into makeup and wardrobe amongst other preparations. Regardless of my state of mind, everything moved along as planned. When I saw myself in the mirror, donning the white wedding gown, I was brought to tears. Despite this being the very image I had once dreamed of, I never thought I'd be wearing it with this feeling. My mother, noticing my tears, gently said, "Oh dear, the bride shouldn't be crying already," as she wiped my tears away. "I'm sorry, Mother, but these weren't tears of joy." The ceremony ended and the reception began. Just before making my entrance, I caught sight of Jane, who gave me a comforting smile. George was cheerful and smiling right from the start, while I could only manage an awkward smile. The reception proceeded without a hitch, as planned. Then came the moment for the bride's farewell letter to her family. The hall darkened, and a spotlight fell only on me and my parents at the head table. I was handed a microphone, but instead of reading my letter, I turned to face the crowd and began to speak softly. "Everyone here today, thank you very much for joining us. Normally, at this point, I should be saying goodbye to my parents and expressing my gratitude for marrying the man I love, but..." A stunned silence swept through the crowd as I broke from tradition. Jane, off to the side of the stage, gave me an encouraging thumbs up. "The real bride is not me," I declared, causing an immediate stir among the guests. "The real bride is Grace Davis, a junior from George's college years. George has admitted that it's not me, but her who he truly loves. I have evidence." After speaking, a spotlight shone on one person in the crowd, and there was Grace, bathed in light. A lively music started playing, and a slideshow began. Images of them holding hands, kissing, and even entering a hotel were displayed, one after another. Then the music stopped, and a video of their conversation played at a loud volume. The hall was in an uproar. "What's going on here? George, you owe us an explanation." Amidst the flying shouts, I handed the microphone to a pale-faced George and bowed to his parents before stepping off the stage. Megan and Jane, who had rushed over, practically dragged me away from the venue. Behind me, the situation had become an unmanageable uproar. Still in my dress, I was led to an unused green room by Jane. Megan brought me my belongings and clothes, and I quickly changed before leaving the wedding venue. Megan drove me home, and I was finally able to catch my breath. We did it. Yeah, we sure did. Despite causing such a commotion, I felt oddly exhilarated. After spilling the beans at that wedding, I packed my bags and returned home. I received quite a scolding from my parents when they got home, but since George was the cause of the issue, it wasn't too severe. Father took care of the aftermath. In the end, the wedding was almost over but was called off, so there were issues like returning the gifts. People understood the situation, so everything went smoothly without any significant issues. The one who had a hard time was George. His infidelity got exposed, and the wedding became a mess. As a result, his parents had to bear the entire cost. On top of that, his boss was present, so the whole company came to know about it. The fact that George had been contacting Grace during work hours using the office email was also discovered, and George was demoted. He didn't lose his job, but with all the commotion he caused, he couldn't possibly work comfortably. Unable to handle the office atmosphere, he soon quit. As for Grace, the other party, she didn't end up with George after causing all that commotion. It seems they broke up eventually. As the engagement had been broken off after we had exchanged betrothal gifts, I asked George for compensation and other costs. George had used most of his savings on wedding day preparations, so his parents had to step in and pay. George, lacking any particular skills, had trouble finding a new full-time job. It seems he's now working part-time to pay back his debts. I also demanded compensation from Grace, his affair partner. As she had a bad reputation and was disowned by her parents, she had to pay the compensation herself, but she didn't have any savings, so she borrowed money from some shady loan sharks. Now she's working in the nightlife industry to make those payments. It's not enough compared to the emotional pain I suffered, but, well, it serves them right. Thanks to Father's compassion, I was put on leave, and with my newfound free time, I decided to take a trip to Alaska. For some reason, people tend to head north in times like these. Jane had also resigned from the wedding venue, taking responsibility for her part in the commotion. Feeling a bit guilty, I decided to invite her to join me on the trip to Alaska. With the damages I received from George, I covered the expenses. We used a ferry for our round trip, as we went by car. On the return ferry, we hit it off with two guys who were bikers. We exchanged contact information and decided to meet up again in New York. The two guys who worked at the same company said they go on a road trip to Alaska on their motorcycles every year. When I got back to New York and told Megan about this, she got upset that I didn't invite her. So it was decided that we would add one more person and organize a 3-on-3 mixer, including Jane. Even though a lot has happened, I've regained my spirit. Life throws curveballs, but I thought, well, such things happen. And with that, I decided to walk firmly towards the future.
What is this? Only for Taylor? How could she be so cruel? With a loud slam on the table, father-in-law, his face red with anger, yelled at me. The table was adorned with lavish dishes. Yet, right in front of my mother-in-law was just a single cup of instant noodles. Until a moment ago, she had stared at it in disbelief. Now, she covered her face, appearing as if she was breaking down in tears. But I saw it. Underneath her hand, she had a sly grin. Seeing father-in-law on her side, she probably thought the situation was turning in her favor. But it wasn't going to be that easy. This instant noodle was just the beginning of our revenge. My name is Eva. I've been married to Robbie for 5 years. We had our first daughter last year, and now I'm a stay-at-home mom. We started living with my in-laws right after our daughter was born. Back then, we lived in company housing, but Robbie was transferred by his company. The new location was near Robbie's childhood home. Hearing this, Robbie's parents were thrilled and began preparations for us to move in. They renovated their aging home, even preparing a room for the baby. It was hard to say no after all that. Sorry, Eva. Mom got a bit too excited. Yeah, after all they've done, it's hard to refuse. But you're at home during the day, right? Just you and Mom. Won't it be uncomfortable? The renovation was their idea. But they made a room for Jenna. And they said they'd help with her. That's a big help. Robbie seemed unsure till the end. But we eventually decided to live with his parents. However, living with the in-laws wasn't easy, especially my mother-in-law, who seemed to have hope for a grandson. She seemed to resent me for having a girl. She constantly made snide remarks about my housework and parenting. The worst was her comments about my cooking. What's with this plant food, Eva? It looks bad. Have you been feeding Robbie this? Well, Robbie said he liked it. Oh, Robbie's just being polite. I can't eat this. Clean it up. You're not eating it? No. I don't like food made by someone like you. And she'd leave the food untouched. No matter how I adjusted the seasoning, she'd taste a bit and say, still not good. Eva, is your taste off? Serving this to your mother-in-law? Even fast food or instant noodles are better. And she'd leave it. Lately, she'd bring home burgers and fries and eat them ostentatiously next to my dishes. It was clear she had no intention of eating my food. If she wasn't going to eat it, why should I prepare her portion? The day I left her spot empty, she was even worse. Why is there no food for me? She shrieked. Well, you always say you don't like my cooking and eat something else. So I thought, unbelievable. Just because I eat something different, you treat me like this? This is too much. She covered her face, sobbing dramatically. Wait, please. It's just that you always... So you're saying it's my fault? She's acting like a tantrum-throwing child. My daughter, who was already at the table, sensed the tense atmosphere and began to cry. This is a mess. Quickly prepared a meal for my mother-in-law and placed it in front of her, who was still complaining. I can't believe this. What on earth were you thinking? I wanted to say those words were mine, but I held back. I felt it was pointless to confront her directly. That night, I discussed my mother-in-law's behavior with my husband, Robbie. Both Robbie and father-in-law leave early for work and return late, so they're unaware of the weekday meals. What? Mom did that? But she's not like that on weekends. She doesn't complain on weekends, probably because you and father-in-law are around, I said. Robbie looked puzzled. I understood his disbelief. No one wants to think their mother would treat their wife that way. I had hoped that by keeping quiet, things would stay calm. But today's outburst was the last straw. And now, her snide remarks were not just directed at me, but also at her daughter. If I was cleaning, she'd follow me around saying, Eva, you're so careless. It's a shame for the house after the renovation. When I showered with my daughter, she'd scold from the dressing room. Don't be so loud. It's unladylike for a girl to be noisy. Who did she get that from? When she told my daughter, Jenna is cute, but it would have been better if you were a boy, I was horrified. I could handle her comments about me, but I feared my daughter would be her next target. When I thought about it, I couldn't stand still. Tears in my eyes, I told Robbie everything. He seemed concerned and said, Okay, I'll talk to Mom. Those words made me breathe a sigh of relief. I hoped that, as her son, he could make her reflect on her behavior. Once you come down, you will realize that you are doing something outrageous. After feeling relieved, I suddenly felt doubt rising inside me. But a doubt crept in. Would she really reflect? After all, she told a small child with a smile that it would have been better if she were a boy. Then maybe mom will. Eva, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Can you help? Yeah, I was against living together from the start. As Robbie spoke, I took out my phone and started searching. Eva! There's laundry piling up. Are you just trying to get Robbie on your side and neglecting the housework? As expected, Robbie's warning had no effect. With Robbie and father-in-law around, she acted even kinder. But when they weren't, she was even harsher. Hearing her shrill voice, Jenna, who had just fallen asleep, began to cry. Even hearing the crying, my mother-in-law just frowned, showing no guilt. So noisy for a girl. It's because you always cuddle her, Eva. Don't speak ill of Jenna. I'm not. I'm just saying it would have been cuter if she were a boy. You're overreacting. She smirked and approached the crib. Don't waste Robbie's money on these gadgets. Girls grow up fine without them, she said, knocking over the baby monitor. Fell, narrowly missing Jenna's face. As I rushed to check on Jenna, my mother-in-law laughed. Oh, and next week is Dad's birthday. Are you prepared? We're inviting his colleagues, so don't embarrass us. Though, your cooking is worse than instant noodles. She laughed loudly and left the living room. Holding my daughter, I could only comfort her. It's okay. Don't cry. It was scary. I won't forgive her. I'll get my revenge side. However, a burning desire for revenge against my mother-in-law raged. A few days later, as she had mentioned, father-in-law's birthday arrived. In their family, they had a tradition of hosting a small home party for father-in-law's birthday every year. This year, upon hearing about it, father-in-law's subordinate said, "Please let us celebrate too," and was invited. Of course, the usual relatives would also attend. It's easy for father-in-law to just invite people, but I wish he'd consider the one who has to prepare everything. I had to clean and tidy up the living room, which would be the party venue, and prepare meals for over 10 people. Of course, there was no chance my mother-in-law would help. She just stood behind me giving orders without lifting a finger. Even when Robbie offered to help, saying, "Mom, Eva, should I help with something?" She'd dismiss him, saying, "Oh, no, Robbie, you don't have to do anything." And then add, "Eva is so good at winning Robbie over, making him do housework. Aren't you ashamed as a wife?" As the relatives and father-in-law subordinates began to arrive, she quickly left the kitchen. I overheard her boasting, "Isn't our house lovely? It's always clean." I can hear people saying things like, "No, that's not true. I just clean my house properly." I'm the one who cleans it. With anger boiling inside, I continued preparing the food. And a few minutes later, all the guests had arrived and were seated, waiting for the food. My mother-in-law, of course, took the seat next to father-in-law, chatting away as if the food would magically appear. When I entered the living room with the dishes, there was a chorus of admiration. "It looks delicious! So stylish!" My mother-in-law, ever the opportunist, said, "Right? Well, I made the two." I silently set the dishes on the table. I placed the main dishes in the center and side dishes in front of each guest. And finally, I placed an instant ramen in front of my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law's eyes, covered in makeup, blinked repeatedly. She blinked in disbelief, looking between me and the instant ramen. Eva? Please enjoy, I said. What's the meaning of? The lively atmosphere was instantly silenced. The relatives and father-in-law subordinates sensed the tension. What's going on here? Father-in-law was the first to shout. Eva! Serving Taylor instant ramen? Explain yourself! Slammed his fist on the table. But I didn't flinch. She always said my cooking was worse than instant ramen, so I served her just that. She'd never say that. How dare you treat your mother-in-law this way? No matter how loudly he shouted, I remained calm. Father-in-law, now frustrated, pointed at Robbie. Robbie! This is because of your poor upbringing. Get rid of that awful woman now! But Robbie coldly replied, Fine, then I'll cut ties with you all. What? What do you mean? If you can still say kick Eva out after saying this, then it's mom who should be kicked out. Robbie showed father-in-law his phone. On the screen was my mother-in-law, laughing as she knocked over the baby monitor. From the phone speaker, her recorded voice echoed, Your cooking is trash. Even instant ramen is better. My mother-in-law's face, which had been downcast as if she were the victim, visibly paled upon hearing the recording. She must have thought father-in-law would side with her and help her navigate the situation. But that wasn't the case. Robbie played multiple recordings from the baby monitor, showcasing her numerous hurtful words and actions. Initially, she tried to avoid eye contact, but soon realized everyone's gaze was fixed on her. In desperation, she lunged for Robbie's phone, losing her balance and face planting into one of the dishes I had prepared. It's a fabrication! Eva's lies! She screamed, her face smeared with makeup and sauce. But her voice was unmistakably the same as the one coming from the phone. All the guests looked at the mother-in-law with disdain, as there was no way to escape the situation. The guests looked at her with disdain, and father-in-law was in shock. Taylor, it's not true. It's not. No matter how much she protested, no one defended her. Robbie stood up and came to my side. We're leaving this house, he declared, and we left the living room. We could still hear her incomprehensible screams, but we never looked back. Soon after, we left their house with our pre-packed bags. Everything that happened was a plan Robbie and I had devised. When Robbie learned of her harassment, he had consulted father-in-law, who refused to acknowledge his wife's behavior. We feared that without undeniable evidence, we'd be forced to continue living with them. So, Robbie devised a plan to expose her in a way she couldn't deny. The baby monitor and enduring her verbal abuse were all part of it. After moving to our new home, father-in-law reached out to apologize. He apparently divorced her after the incident. In front of his relatives and subordinates, his wife's disgusting behavior was revealed, and father-in-law even made a comment to cover it up. Robbie thought that they would have lost face if they didn't get a divorce. We don't know how she's managing now. But she tried to approach Robbie at his workplace, not knowing our new address. She was reported as a suspicious person and taken by the police. Father-in-law said that she should forgive him because she had thrown out her mother-in-law. But she said, What are you going to do? For me, it was the time when I consulted her about Eva. So to be honest, I think we can just ignore it like this. I don't mean right away. That's right. I'll let him remind me for a while. And so, we haven't been in touch for a while now. Maybe in the future, we'll let him see our child. For now, we want to enjoy our time as family of 3. Robbie admitted that he had been too focused on work since the transfer and hadn't been there for Jenna and me. Since moving, he's been taking days off to spend with us. We're looking forward to a peaceful life together in our new environment.
So, mother-in-law, have you completed the inheritance paperwork yet? Yeah, have you received the money already? Back when my husband was well, Julian and his family hardly ever visited. But now, here they are. They deliberately brought our grandson, Elliot, to my house and started asking about my late husband's inheritance. Without even attempting to hide their greedy intentions, they suggested the inheritance should be used for our grandson. For most grandparents, grandchildren are inherently adorable. However, Elliot, who was brought over just so Julian could squeeze money out of me, seemed like a stranger. Now, the process is complicated and it's not done yet. I quickly tell a lie. Ashley smirks. Would you like some help with that? Julian raised his voice, clearly irritated by my attitude. Meanwhile, Elliot, who hadn't even greeted me, was running around the living room and rummaging through the fridge for snacks and juice. For a grandchild, his behavior was far from adorable. And his parents, who were only here to talk about money, did nothing to discipline him. I was stunned by their audacity. To make matters worse, the next day Ashley's parents showed up, preaching to me about what a family should be like. Despite being practically strangers to me, they had no issue voicing their self-serving opinions, possibly blinded by the $3 million inheritance. I had reached my breaking point. Just then, a loud crash echoed from behind me. Taking that as my cue, I decided it was time to teach them a lesson. I am Kristen, 66 years old this year. I was a simple housewife with 2 children, but my late husband was a businessman who had amassed considerable wealth. After his funeral, the subject of inheritance caused friction between me and my children. They say money changes people, but I never thought my own son would be among them. I never expected this to escalate into such a chaotic situation, involving even non-family members. After the funeral, I called a lawyer and discussed the inheritance with my children. In the end, almost all of my husband's estate would be transferred to me, thanks to a will he'd prepared that was intended to compensate me for my struggles. I'd spent 6 years catering to my husband, who was averse to living in a facility. He had a variety of interests: smoking, drinking, betting on horse races, which made caregiving anything but easy. At that time, our children had already moved out. I had done my best not to burden them. So, I felt grateful for the portion my husband had left for me in his will, recognizing my efforts. The inheritance amounted to around $3 million. My daughter Sasha was supportive from the get-go. She was convinced that I should inherit everything, especially considering the separate sums my husband had prepared for the children. The problem was Julian, my son. Frowning, Julian started to speak his mind freely. Sasha is single, and I have a family. It's unfair we get the same amount. Well, your wife isn't entitled to any of it, so it's only fair. Even so, $3 million for mom, that's way too much. What about your children? Julian was intent on portraying me as a greedy to increase his own share. Despite the will being kept safely with a lawyer, he claimed that I fabricated it. He argued that it was unfair not to divide the inheritance equally among his sister and himself. Finally, Julian threatened to sue me, drawing sharp criticism from the attending lawyer. If they were so adamant about their entitlement, they should have at least shown their faces more often. Sasha used to visit now and then, but Julian never made an effort. He always cited work or parenting as reasons for not visiting us. I sighed, thinking about Julian, who had shown no help with caregiving, but was now so concerned about the money. "Don't worry about Julian, Mom," Sasha reassured me. But is Julian really that strapped for cash? I wondered. Who knows? They often go on family trips. Maybe they just want more spending money, Sasha speculated. Her words gave me an uneasy feeling. That gut feeling proved accurate. I was about to get entangled in yet another fruitless quarrel with Julian and his family. A while after discussing the inheritance and consulting with the lawyer, the paperwork for receiving the inheritance was finally complete. That's when Julian and his wife, Ashley, showed up at our home. Though I had an uneasy feeling, I let them in. After brief pleasantries, they quickly got to the topic of the inheritance. "Did you already finish all the inheritance paperwork, mother-in-law?" "Yeah, is the money transferred?" "No, the process is a bit complicated, so it's not done yet." "If you need help, we can assist. Managing $3 million must be a headache, right?" "I'm good, thanks. So, what brings you here today?" "Come on, don't be so cold. We even brought your grandson to see you." Along with them was Elliot, my grandson, whom I hadn't seen since he was in elementary school, and even before my husband passed away. I had only babysat Elliot a few times when he was a baby. I hadn't even been invited to his birthday parties or any other celebrations lately. The most I had done was send gifts and monetary gifts through Julian. To a regular grandparent, a grandchild might be unconditionally adorable. But to me, Elliot felt like a stranger, just another kid Julian and his spouse brought along to squeeze money out of me. "Isn't it great to see your grandson after such a long time?" "Well, I suppose. Kids will start costing more money as they grow, you know." "That's true. You two better start working hard." "What's that supposed to mean? Don't you want to do something nice for your adorable grandson?" Meanwhile, Elliot, the subject of all this fuss, didn't even greet me. He was busy running around the living room and even went as far as open the fridge to dig out snacks and juice. Neither Ashley nor Julian reprimanded Elliot. They simply emphasized how energetic and cute their son was. "What's so cute about this disrespectful kid?" "Elliot, don't you think you're a bit too wild? Teaching manners and common sense is a parent's job." "Oh, our parenting approach doesn't include scolding, so it's fine." I had no idea what she meant by fine, but it seemed Elliot wasn't getting the hint that he was being admonished. Ashley followed Elliot around as he freely explored the house, so I felt compelled to step in. "Would you listen?" I began, but Elliot cut me off with a, "You're annoying!" He laughed dismissively and even slapped my leg. Watching all this and seeing my son and daughter-in-law only pestering for money without disciplining their out-of-line son, I had reached my limit. "Enough is enough! Julian, you've already had the inheritance talk with the attorney." "Yeah, but taking $3 million is way over the top, Mom. Didn't think you'd be so greedy." "The greedy one is you. I don't have money to give to people who's never done anything for me." What followed was a heated argument over who was the real money grabber. Frustrated but resolute, I kicked Julian and his family out of my house. Had they been more cordial with my husband and me over the years, I might have considered leaving them an inheritance or education funds. But watching Julian and his crew trying to force their selfish agenda, I felt nothing but anger and disbelief. Despite our heated exchange and my asking them to leave, Julian and his family returned the next day with Ashley's parents in tow. Even after asking them their purpose through the intercom, All they did was demand entry into the house. Figuring it would be a nuisance to the neighbors, I reluctantly let them in. Once inside, Ashley's parents began lecturing me. Look, we're both families with adorable grandchild. We need to help each other out. That's right, you've just lost your husband, you must be feeling vulnerable. So this is family, is it? This is helping each other? I felt like the two of them went on and on, lecturing me. Julian and Ashley just nodded in agreement, not uttering a word. As usual, their adorable son, Elliot, was running around the living room, full of energy. I told him to stop running. "Shut up!" Elliot shouted, as per usual. And for that, rather than being concerned about the child's behavior, I ended up getting blamed by all four of them. Normal families would want to help their sons and grandchildren in any way they can, especially for when the day comes that we need their help. I plan to prepare things for myself so that I'm not a burden on my children. That's a lonely way to think, and that's why you don't get to see your grandson. Aren't you ashamed to only think about yourself? That's right, our daughter gave birth to that child. Your husband was Elliot's grandfather. He would have wanted to help financially. They talked a lot about family ties, but in the end, it all came back to money. Were these two also swayed by Julian and Ashley? Were they here just to get their hands on some inheritance? I had had enough. They assumed Julian would be their future caregiver because he's their daughter's husband. They talked nonsense about what a family should be, even though they're practically strangers. Clash! Suddenly, a loud noise came from behind, making everyone turn around. There on the floor were shattered pieces of a vase that used to sit on a shelf, and Elias' surprised face. He probably knocked it over while running around. Seeing the vase my late husband loved, now in pieces, I felt a surge of anger inside me. Wow, that's a spectacle. Hey, Elliot, are you okay? You didn't get hurt, did you? Why would you put something dangerous within a child's reach? If our precious grandson gets hurt, you know you'll have to pay for it, right? Julian, who just smirked, Ashley and her parents making a fuss about potential injuries. I listened to them in silence, already fuming, and let out a heavy sigh. So, where is the inheritance? You've probably settled all the formalities by now, right? About that, huh? That vase Elliot just shattered was part of my husband's legacy. For a moment, Julian and the others exchanged glances and fell silent. They glanced briefly at the shards, then looked at my angry face and paled. Mother-in-law, you're joking, right? No joke. As you all mentioned, the formalities are already completed, but keeping that much money in cash is a risk nowadays. Who knows who might target it? So I converted it into something valuable. Kristen replied, a hint of sarcasm in her voice. The confusion on their faces was evident. I had to hold back a chuckle. Pretending to be distraught, I looked down and covered my mouth. Come on, there's no way that ugly vase is worth $3 million, right? Right, Mom? Would you like me to show you the certificate for the vase? Oh, and I suppose I'll need to file a police report. What? You're kidding, right? It was a child's mistake. Well, parents are responsible for their children's actions, right? Can you cover the $3 million? Don't say such things. After all, families should help each other. Yes, exactly. So, you'll help me, right? After all, I'm family too, and you ruined my husband's legacy. The four of them exchanged glances, clearly flustered and at a loss for words. The first to speak was Julian. He said it was Ashley's fault for not disciplining their child properly. Ashley trying to argue back, and Ashley's parents defensively claiming that how their grandchild was raised wasn't their concern. Enough! How can adults who can't even apologize talk about disciplining a child? Not one of them attempted to apologize to me. This only fueled my anger further. I couldn't stand their attitude, acting as it was okay to inconvenience others. Only Elliot quietly apologized to me, saying, "I'm sorry." He probably did so reflexively, sensing how angry I was. Despite witnessing all this, the four of them kept their heads down and said nothing. Julian finally mustered the courage to say, "We'll discuss this another day." Then they all hastily left. Elliot, the person at the center of all this, was led away with a clueless expression on his face, which I couldn't help but find amusing. So, that's why I thought I should fill in Sasha first. What is Julian even thinking? People really change when money is involved. After a hearty laugh, I made sure to tell Sasha about what had transpired and to be wary of Julian. Every now and then, they'd call as if they'd forgotten about everything, usually about their son's activities or birthday gifts. Every time they call, I remind them cleaning up those broken pot pieces was heartbreaking. After that, they usually hang up pretty quickly. A few weeks after reaching out to Sasha, I got a call from her. Apparently, just as we suspected, Julian had gone crying to Sasha. "Hey Sasha, can you lend me some of the inheritance you received?" "Are you kidding? You're still asking for that?" "I'm begging you. I've gotten myself into a bit of a jam." Julian had frantically approached Sarah, saying he needed to compensate for a $3 million vase he'd broken. When asked what happened to the inheritance he received, Julian said Ashley and his in-laws were spendthrifts and had already blown through it all. Sasha apparently lectured Julian, saying that he brought this on himself by being greedy when he should have been content with what he had. Julian desperately tried to use his kids as an excuse to wheedle more money, but Sasha patiently explained that even her share wouldn't cover his debts. Dejected, Julian went back home. Hearing all this, I couldn't help but laugh again. It seems Julian and his family are now at odds over who should take responsibility for the debt. Occasionally, they'd call, taking turns asking for leniency, but as soon as I'd suggest we talk through lawyers, they'd go silent. They ended up hanging up on their end. Thanks to that, I'm now enjoying my days without any involvement with them. By the way, the story about my grandson Elliot breaking a $3 million vase as part of the inheritance was, of course, a lie. The actual vase was a cheap one my late husband had picked up from Home Depot because he liked it. It had been a decorative vase since my husband's time, but we only started displaying it after Julian and his family had moved out. There's no way they could have known about it. If they had shown any regret for their actions and a willingness to make amends, I would have happily told them the truth. However, I haven't heard from them since those few phone calls. In fact, it seems they've blocked my number. I can't even get through to them. Naturally, the real inheritance is still sitting safely in the bank. I had been planning to use a little for my retirement and leave the rest for the kids, but after the incident, I've completely changed my mind. Sasha, how about we go on a trip together sometime? Sounds good. Where should we go? How about a hot spring resort? Oh, that sounds lovely. Also, I've been wanting to have a proper conversation with you about my inheritance. After seeing Julian and his family's true colors, I've had a change of heart. I can't entrust my late husband's hard-earned money to people like them. I'm now thinking of not only leaving the inheritance to Sasha, but also exploring better ways to use it as we move forward in life.
I'm heading out today, so please take care of the house. Here's the key. I was sick of my mother-in-law Megan's habit of dumping household chores on me like this. I asked my husband Richard to speak to Megan about it, but she managed to win over my father-in-law Brian with her crocodile tears, making the family accept that it's okay to pile chores on me. And you still haven't cleaned the bathroom. I wanted to shower before Brian gets back. Hey, I'm tired. Give me a massage. She started treating me like a housekeeper. While massaging Megan, I realized something. That's when I started planning to kick her out. I'm Christina, 24 years old. I've been a housewife since marrying Richard 2 years ago. I always dreamed of this lifestyle and was quite happy with it. Richard, whom I met in a college club, was surprisingly mature and cool for his age. He was initially quiet but turned out to be just shy. After a few group hangouts, he started talking to me. We found a lot in common, from hobbies to food preferences, and quickly became friends. Before long, we were hanging out alone more often than with our friends. He promised to me on my birthday in our junior year of college. We were dining in a somewhat fancy restaurant when I mentioned, "I'm 21 now, I should start thinking about a job." Richard's proposal was, "Well, why don't you work for me?" Knowing my dream was to be a housewife, Richard promised to work hard so that my dream would come true. We got engaged in college, but living together would wait until after graduation. That was the condition set by my parents. We used our savings from part-time jobs along with money our parents had set aside for our wedding. We decided not to rely on our parents for our new life, so we rented a small apartment we could afford on Richard's starting salary. The apartment was small and a bit far from the station, but married life was fun. Preparing breakfast and sandwiches for Richard, welcoming him home, having dinner, and sleeping together in our small bed were all enjoyable. Still, at that time, I wished for a slightly better life. Looking back, maybe we were happier living just the two of us. Everything fell apart 6 months ago. Richard's parents lived in New Orleans due to his father Brian's job, while Richard, my parents, and I lived in Boston. Brian got transferred back to Boston and they suggested buying a 2-family home. Thinking, parents-in-law were in their 50s, healthy, and had no chronic illnesses. I accepted the offer thinking it wouldn't affect our lifestyle much. Living in a 2-family home will be much better than directly sharing a space, I thought, and welcomed the idea. Brian had a well-paying job, so money wasn't an issue. Brian took care of most of the mortgage payments. For Richard, it was just like paying the rent we had always paid. So we were delighted to move into a bigger, detached house without changing our budget. We hadn't spent much time with Richard's parents, who always lived in New Orleans. We only met them at family gatherings or weddings. Despite this, we had high hopes, thinking, they're Richard's parents, they must be good people. Little did we know about Megan's challenging personality. We renovated a pre-owned duplex and were able to move in about 3 months after the in-laws suggested it. We moved in mid-December. Due to the layout, the more spacious first floor went to the in-laws. We took the slightly smaller second floor with a balcony. The entrances were separate. Next to the in-laws' entrance was a staircase that led to our own entrance. The in-laws were planning to move in April of the following year. They wanted to bring some of their furniture and clothes during the holiday season before the New Year. So we suggested celebrating New Year together. Brian said he was free starting the 28th, so even if they arrived on the 30th, we would have 2 days to settle in. We thought everything would be set by the night of the 31st if all 4 of us worked together, but only the stuff arrived on the 29th. The in-laws didn't show up until the evening of the 31st. Brian apologized, explaining that Megan had refused to come until the last minute. Megan saw the unopened boxes and said, "Oh, you left them like that?" We had considered unpacking but decided against it after discussing with Richard. When Richard explained, Megan lazily twirled her hair and said, "You could have unpacked." The unpackaging didn't finish that day. We had planned to dine in the spacious living room on the first floor but had to settle for our second floor home. The in-laws seemed to enjoy the meal and they relaxed in our living room afterward. Brian kept saying we need to unpack, but Megan said she was super tired from the move and just lounged on our sofa watching the New Year countdown on TV. With Megan unwilling to help, the three of us went to the in-laws' side to finish unpacking. When we came back to our place to toast the new year, Megan was gone. We found her sleeping in our bedroom, still dressed. Both the living room and bedroom TVs were on and she had helped herself to the champagne and mixed nuts I had set aside for toasting. Brian apologized, saying,
Megan must have been really tired from the move. We did unpack right away, so please be understanding.
I knew it wasn't Brian's fault. We let him sleep in our bedroom and Richard and I slept in the living room. The next morning, Megan was the last to wake up and Brian. To our surprise, after getting dressed, Megan told us she was going to meet some friends in Boston and quickly left while we were still unpacking. Brian was understandably upset about this, so ironically, Richard and I ended up calming him down. Late that night, Megan came back slightly tipsy and without any explanation, went straight to our bedroom and fell asleep. Angered by this as well, Brian said he was going to sleep on the sofa at in-laws' house and stormed out. The next day, Brian left to visit an executive in Boston who had helped him in the past. Megan woke up later and also went out with friends. Somehow, Megan returned in the evening with a cheerful Brian. Richard and I had managed to finish unpacking after the in-laws left and Brian seemed pleased with the progress. We had mostly set up the in-laws' bedroom too, so they slept there that night, allowing me to finally sleep in my own bed. The next day, the in-laws headed back to New Orleans. After seeing them off, I felt suddenly exhausted. Lying on the living room sofa, Richard apologized.
Mom is too free-spirited. I didn't think she would be like this. Sorry for making you do all the work, Christina. But once they have moved, they'll be living separately, so we won't have to deal with this anymore.
I was frustrated with Megan, who had a habit of imposing her will on others, but I didn't complain, figuring it wouldn't matter much after the move. However, Megan's selfish behavior only escalated. When spring arrived, along with Brian's job transfer, the in-laws moved in, and again, I was expected to help unpack. About 2 months after they moved in, Megan started coming over to our house. Usually, after sending Richard off and finishing breakfast cleanup, Megan would arrive around 10 a.m., all dolled up. "Hey, I'm heading out today. Please take care of the house. Here's the key," she would say, handing me the key to her house before leaving. I reluctantly ended up doing the chores for their home too. Megan would typically return around 6 p.m., nonchalantly greet Brian and retrieve the key from me. At first, it was just once a week, but Megan gradually increased the frequency of her visits, making me more and more responsible for their housework. One day, I told her I have my own chores, I can't do this anymore. Megan walked into my house, looked around, and said, "Everything's clean, isn't it? You get your chores done so quickly, Christina, you can handle ours easily," and left the key on the living room table before heading out. I decided it wasn't a good idea to bring this up directly with Brian, so I talked to Richard. After apologizing for Megan's behavior, he said,
"You can ignore Mom's demands."
"I can't just ignore them," I protested. Finally, Richard agreed to address the issue with Megan when Brian was around. They planned to talk during a meal on Brian's day off. As usual, Megan pretended to be engrossed in the TV while I was cooking. In the presence of Brian, Megan acts as if she is doing normal housework. During dinner, Richard said,
"Mom, it's okay if you go out, but don't push your housework onto Christina."
Brian immediately rebuked Megan.
"Are you really doing that? We had an agreement not to be a burden to Richard and Christina. They have their own lives too, you know?"
Then Megan burst into tears and said, "I want to help with housework too, but my back has been hurting lately. It's hard to bend over. That's why I've been asking Christina to help. I thought it would make it awkward for her if I were around. So I went out. I'm sorry, Christina." That's a blatant lie about her back hurting. Why? Because just last weekend, taking advantage of Brian being away on a business trip, Megan went out to play golf with her friends. People with bad backs don't go playing golf. But Brian, who was unaware of all this, said,
"I see. I didn't know your back was bad. Christina, could you help with the chores until she feels better? I'll of course pay you extra for it."
Brian's anger seemed to evaporate as he became concerned for Megan and turned to me for help. Richard seemed to understand as well, saying,
So that's why.
once we were alone, back at our house next door, I told him Megan's back pain was a lie.
But Dad said he's giving us money and you have always managed. So why not? We can be a bit laid back about our own stuff. I'll even tell Dad to make sure you get paid well. So you can buy whatever you want. Just give me a little more allowance in return, he said with a smile.
Something we realized after parents-in-law moved here is that the father-son duo, Brian and Richard, are too kind-hearted. They have basic common sense and show anger when it's violated, but their kindness means they easily forgive Megan's filmsy excuses. Megan knew this, so she told convincing lies to get Brian and Richard on her side. Once Brian started giving her an allowance for housework, she began to neglect her chores even more. She used to dump chores on me when Brian was out, saying things like, "I can't move because my back hurts," or "I can't get up, my back hurts and I feel sick," pushing me to do all the housework from morning till night. Oblivious to Megan's lies, Brian would say, "Sorry, Christina," and head out. After Brian left, Megan would shower, dress up, and go out without saying a word. By this time, I had been given a duplicate key to the in-laws' house. When she returned before Brian did, she would complain about the dinner I made. "Isn't this too little? Can't you make more dishes? You're getting an allowance. Don't slack off. My dress is wrinkled. Iron it properly. The bathroom isn't clean yet. I wanted to shower before Brian comes back. Come on, give me a massage. I'm tired," she would say whenever she wanted. She really seemed to think of me as an actual housekeeper, yet when Brian returned, she would put on a facade saying, "This is delicious. Christina, your housework is more meticulous than mine," and Brian and Richard were completely oblivious to Megan's attitude. Even when I complained to Richard, all he said was,
"You can ignore unreasonable demands."
I had reached my breaking point with Megan. I thought the only way left was to secretly film Megan when Brian and Richard went around and show them the evidence. Just when I thought this, an unexpected opportunity arose. It was the day Brian returned from a business trip. As usual, Megan saw him off and went on a trip saying she was going sightseeing with friends. She returned earlier than Brian, as always, and told me to give her a massage because she was tired. I'm the one who's tired after doing all the housework, not you, Megan, I thought, but saw a red mark on the back of her neck while massaging her shoulders. It looked like a hickey. At first, I thought Brian gave it to her and was impressed that he still had it in him in his 50s, but then, considering he had been on a business trip for about 5 days, I thought, could a hickey really last that long? Could Megan be having an affair? I found it hard to believe that Megan, who had lived in New Orleans her whole life, would have so many friends in Boston. That's why I hired a private investigator to look into it. Luckily, I knew Megan's daily routine and she always went on trips when Brian was out of town for work, so following her was easy. Long story short, Megan was cheating and she was being pretty bold about it. Within 2 weeks of hiring the investigator, I had my answer. Seeing photos and videos of Megan in compromising situations left me speechless. She was holding hands with a man her own age as they entered a hotel. The pictures even showed her passionately kissing the guy at the hotel bar. It was riskier than I had imagined. I was shaking with anger, not just because she was neglecting her housework to have an affair, but because she was betraying someone as kind as Brian. She had the audacity to betray Brian while he worked hard to provide for us. I couldn't let her get away with this. Her birthday was coming up, so I decided that would be the day to put my plan into action. Why don't we throw Megan a surprise party? When I proposed the idea, Brian seemed thrilled. Here's the plan. Brian would tell Megan he had to work that day and encourage her to go out for a birthday dinner with the other man. I'll invite her out to dinner and we can surprise her at the hotel, I told Brian. Brian believed me and pretended to go to work that evening. Megan, after taking longer than usual to get ready, finally left the house saying how disappointed she was that she couldn't spend her birthday with Brian. I had the investigator tail her and it seemed she did go to the usual hotel where she met her lover. Had she gone somewhere else, I would have had to quickly notify Brian about a change of plans, but luckily, she chose the usual place. As soon as I got word that Megan had arrived at the hotel, I headed there by taxi. We have to expose the truth to Brian before she goes into the room with that man. By the time I arrived, Brian had also sent me a message saying he was there. I knew where they were sitting from the investigator, so I told Brian we still have time before our reservation and led him to the bar. While walking to the bar, Brian was excited, asking things like,
Do you think Megan will like this gift? Do you think the surprise will go well?
It pained me to see his happiness, but I had to go through with my plan for his sake. Since I knew what Megan was wearing, I was able to identify her from behind. I chose a spot where we could clearly see her back. From there, I thought I'd be able to see Megan and the man as they moved, and sure enough, I could. About 20 minutes after sitting down with Brian, Megan, probably thinking about moving to a hotel room, wrapped her arm around the man's and started to work off in a flirty manner. I had a perfect view of Megan's profile. I glanced at Brian, wondering what if he hadn't noticed. Brian was staring, lost for words. Then after about 5 seconds of shock, Brian ran after Megan, catching her by the arm near the bar's exit. What? Megan looked stunned.
Megan, what are you doing here? Who is this guy?
Oh,
What's going on?
the surprised one was the man. Brian, demanding an explanation, told the man,
She's my wife. I need to talk to her. Sorry, but you should go home now.
and walked out of the bar, still holding Megan's arm. I quickly settled the bill for Brian and me and followed them. In the taxi back, Megan seemed to realize her situation and kept saying, It's not like that, Brian. Brian said nothing. When we got home, Brian told me.
I would like for you to go home too, Christina.
I said, okay, but concerned that kind-hearted Brian might get fooled by Megan again, I discreetly went to the in-laws' house with the incriminating photos and hid to observe their living room.
What was that about?
You're misunderstanding. Megan began making excuses to an angry Brian. I went out drinking because celebrating my birthday alone was boring. I had too much to drink and the guy next to me offered to help. He said he would walk me to a taxi because I was stumbling. Brian seemed close to being fooled by Megan's smooth excuses. I couldn't keep quiet. Bursting into the living room, I yelled, Don't be fooled, Brian. Megan is having an affair and it's not the first time she's met that man. What? Christina, don't say things you don't understand. Eavesdropping is the worst. Brian, look at this. I handed Brian the evidence photos. What's this bunch of papers? Megan, who had been confident, started to panic when she realized what was handed to Brian were photos. No, I didn't do it. These pictures are fake. Megan was yelling this, but Brian was quietly looking through the photos one by one. After seeing them all, he shouted,
You're the worst, Megan. Do you even realize what you have done?
I told you. It's not me. These pictures are photoshopped. Megan argued but started to cry at Brian's words.
How could Christina Photoshop pictures of you with a guy you just met today?
I was lonely. You're always busy with work. She tried to master her usual crocodile tears. Brian just silently stared at her. Just when it seemed like Brian might fall for Megan's act again, Richard, who had just come home from work, entered the living room.
Is Christina here? I came looking for her because she wasn't home. Wait, why is Mom crying?
Wordlessly, Brian handed the photos to Richard. Megan tried to snatch them back, but Richard was quicker.
What's this? As you can see, it looks like Megan has been having an affair.
It's not what it looks like. The devil made me do it, Richard. You understand, right? As Megan tried to cling to Richard, he swatted her away.
Don't touch me!
Megan collapsed in exaggerated tears. Brian then said forcefully,
Get out!
I won't. Absolutely not. Please forgive me, okay? She repeated, but Brian ignored her. Megan must have realized that saying anything more was futile. She got up weakly and started packing her things. Finally, she yelled at Brian, Fine, he listens to me and only loves me. I'm happier with him, and stormed out of the house, but it seemed she couldn't get in touch with the other man. It seems like he thought Megan was single and vanished before getting slapped with alimony for the affair. Megan returned the next day and tearfully apologized to Brian, saying, I'm sorry. This time, it wasn't her exaggerated sobbing ad. As she left the house, she seemed genuinely remorseful. Still, Brian didn't forgive Megan. He changed the locks on their house that same day and kicked her out for good. Half a year has passed since then and my parents-in-law have divorced. Megan was adamant about not divorcing, saying things like, "I'll fight it in court." But since she was 100% at fault, she couldn't get a lawyer to take her case seriously, so they divorced. There was no alimony claim against Megan and likewise no division of property. Since I was the one who initiated their divorce indirectly, I apologized to Brian for it. He thanked me saying, "I'm glad you told me. I didn't know she was that kind of woman. Thanks to you, Christina, I found out." When he found out I had used a private investigator, he asked, "Do you know who the guy is?" I did. So when I told him, Brian said he met the guy. A graduate student who thought Megan was a single 40-year-old. He profusely apologized, saying he has no idea she was married. Brian chose not to demand alimony from the guy as long as he never met with Megan again. The man agreed, saying, "I had no intention of meeting her again, even if she became single." Megan, who had been living off Brian's credit card, was struggling to make ends meet after being thrown out without any division of property. She regularly showed up near our place asking Brian and Richard for forgiveness and even for money. I have also been approached a few times with Megan asking me to help them reconcile. Brian, now fed up with Megan, sold the house that was under mortgage and bought a new one elsewhere. Both Brian and Richard considered moving out but decided against it as I had no issue with kind-hearted Brian and it would be hard for him to live alone. Since moving to the new place, Megan hasn't bothered us and we're living happily. Brian always compliments me on my housekeeping and ever since finding out that I'm pregnant last month, both Richard and Brian have been helping out more around the house, while my first pregnancy and the upcoming birth do make me anxious. The stress-inducing Megan is gone, and with kind Richard and Brian around, I think everything will be okay.
What on earth is this woman? Where did you pick her up from? She's just a heap of poverty.
Mom, what are you saying? That's disrespectful. Please stop.
You said there's someone you want me to meet. I thought she'd be some kind of socialite, and yet, what is this woman? Wearing such plain and cheap clothes, with nails like an old lady, and hardly any makeup. She's no woman, she's done. I will absolutely not allow you to marry this person. Quiet. People like this, poor people, they give me allergies. Get out at once.
Dear, you're going too far. Stop it. It's shameful. That's enough. I'm marrying Emily. It's me who's getting married. I won't let you complain. Emily, let's go.
My name is Emily. George proposed to me after 2 years of dating. We've been too busy at work to meet each other's parents. I went to George's parents' house to announce our engagement, and this happened. I was heartbroken at how bad it started. His mother seems to want George to marry a rich lady. Apparently, there was a lot of disagreement when George's older brother got married too. George and I discussed what to do from here. And that day marked the beginning of the phone attacks from my mother-in-law. Are you really thinking of marrying George? Yes, I want to start a family. Don't you feel it's impossible for you to start a family with George? Let me be clear, there is a world of difference between George, who grew up in a wealthy family, and you who grew up in a poor family. It's like a homeless person marrying a celebrity. That's not... Of course, it's impossible. George is a good bride candidate. He's been in private school since elementary school, so he's only ever been around wealthy people. That's why he looks at you, being poor, and thinks it's something new. He's just being fooled by you.
I'm not deceiving him. I fell in love with George, even if he had no money.
Ah ha ha ha, don't make me laugh. You have no right to fall in love with George. Exclude yourself immediately.
So you're saying you won't accept our marriage?
Finally got it? I've been saying that from the beginning. I can give you severance pay, but for someone of your class, how about a single quarter?
Listening to my mother-in-law, it was truly a parade of disrespect, and I had lost the strength to fight back. When I told George about this, he immediately called his mother. Mom, what did you say to Emily on the phone?
What? I just told her the truth. George, you're old enough now. Why don't you consider an arranged marriage?
I already refused the arranged marriage talk, didn't I? It's me who's getting married. I won't marry anyone but Emily. Don't contact Emily anymore.
Hold on, George. You can't speak to your mother like that. Wake up.
What the heck? I don't get what you're saying. Moreover, stop treating Emily like she's poor.
What's wrong with calling a poor person poor? A girl raised by poor folks is no good woman. I'm saying this for your future, so think about it.
There's no need for that. I'm marrying Emily, so just leave us alone. George really argued with my mother-in-law. Seeing that, I felt relieved, but my mother-in-law's attack wasn't over that easily. I was so overwhelmed with anxiety, wondering if it was a good idea to get married in this state. I discussed with George, and we decided to get married without a ceremony, only by registering our marriage. Then it was resolved that we would no longer go to his family's house, and then the calls from my mother-in-law stopped abruptly. I was feeling happy and living a normal newlywed life, but about a year later, we were told that we needed to attend a celebration for my father-in-law's longevity as a couple, and it was something we couldn't ignore, so we attended the celebration meal. My father-in-law had always been a fan of a fancy French restaurant and had an old relationship with the owner who had made a reservation. On the day of the meal, "Oh, you're quite late." "We're not late, so it's not right to say we're late. Anyway, Dad, congratulations." "Father-in-law, congratulations. This is from George and me." "Thank you. You didn't need to bother. I'll greatly receive it. This is great."
"All that is irrelevant. Let's toast." Thinking that, we toasted, and as we were eating, I thought the conversation would pick up. "When will you guys have a kid? And you're not even quitting your job. Are you incapable of housework? You're a failure as a woman."
That's something George and I discussed and decided. I'm thinking of quitting my job when I have a child.
"Shut up. 100 years earlier to talk back. This is why I hate poor people."
And the storm of complaints began again. Then, at the wealthy family meal, my mother-in-law,
"I can't eat with such a woman," she said, and jabbed her fork at me. I was unconsciously, "Ah!"
"Hey, Mom, what are you doing? Stop this now."
"I'm telling you, I can't eat with such a woman. If you understand, then leave right away, you poor thing."
Even the brother-in-law and wife who had come and my father-in-law were just stunned by my mother-in-law's attitude. However, one word from me caused a shocking turn of events that froze the air. I kept my mouth shut, but I couldn't take it anymore. "Emily, what is it about me that you hate so much?"
"The answer is simple. It's because you're poor. I have a repulsion just breathing the same air."
"You sure do talk a lot. Isn't it you who have a repulsive reaction to your own poverty? You grew up in an orphanage, after all."
What are you talking about? I come from a wealthy family. Don't make things up just because you're poor."
"Your parents came from a poor family. One day they were involved in a car accident, they passed away, and you were placed in an orphanage."
"Shut up! I am not like that."
"You've always claimed to be a rich lady. Your parents died and ruined the company, but you were raised like a rich girl."
Yes, that's right. Of course I am. This woman is lying. Kick her out right now."
You know Mrs. Lisa from Brooklyn, my best friend's mom, right?"
"Lisa from Brooklyn?"
"Lisa from Brooklyn, same name as the wife of our company's president." "That's right, the wife of the president of your company, my friend, their daughter, had been working overseas and we hadn't met often, but when I visited her home after a long time, her mother was there and we started talking about my marriage. Then Lisa from Brooklyn told me that she grew up in an orphanage, and guess what? She was in the same orphanage as you, mother-in-law."
No, that's a lie. There's no proof."
I was shocked. I didn't think that you grew up poor, lost your parents, and were placed in an orphanage. "I didn't hear anything about this. Explain it to me properly. Did you trick me when we got married?"
"No, it's not like that. Why would you listen to such a woman? It's obviously a lie. You need to stop this at once, lying woman."
It was then a woman appeared.
"You're still as messy as ever, not even showing a hint of manners. You're blinded by money and have zero learning ability." "Who are you? This is a private reservation."
"I'm Lisa from Brooklyn. Long time no see. Or rather, we haven't met since we left the orphanage."
Lisa from...
"Yes. Don't tell me you've forgotten. We promised back in the orphanage, didn't we? To find a rich man and live a wealthy life." I got married to a company president and made my dream come true. My husband knows that I grew up in an orphanage and I've been devoted to him. After all, I have nothing but gratitude, right, George? You know about this, don't you?" "Mrs. President, good to see you. Of course I do. You're really a lovey-dovey couple, and it's famous within the company. I always admired you guys. It's enviable."
"Even though you have such a great son, what were you doing? Could it be you've been doing something like a fraud filled with lies?" Stop it. Can you just leave?"
"No way. I can't just stand by when my daughter's best friend is in a pinch."
"You've been doing unnecessary things like that for a long time. Stop interfering."
"I've just come to share the truth. Is it bad to tell the truth? You must be joking, right?"
"Just leave."
My mother-in-law's face turned pale as she watched. Right in front of her was her former best friend from her time at the facility.
And then Cherry continued her story. Jasmine was wayward since middle school, skipping school, hanging out with the wrong crowd, getting scolded when caught. Stop it, please! Lack of enthusiasm for high school, barely attending classes, going through guys from the local gang. It was rumored that she was a wicked woman who couldn't say no. Stop it! Moreover, when you mentioned Razor Jasmine, there was nobody who didn't know. A winning gang leader, a figure that was avoided and not approached. Parents weren't there to keep her in check. It was thought impossible for such a horrid woman to marry. It was like you married the CEO of Cornerstone Real Estate. Quite the scam.
Hey, what does this mean? What do you have to say for yourself? I haven't heard any of this.
At company parties, didn't she complain about feeling unwell? I don't think she's ever attended. She's just a clueless gangster. Her real nature would soon be exposed. That's why she has the nerve to be a con artist.
So that's why you always felt ill when it came to parties. I thought it was strange, but this is the reason.
That's not true. Please listen to me.
There's no need to listen to your stories.
No way.
Cherry just told us the truth. I don't want to hear any of your lies.
Please don't bully Emily. After all, her father is a major shareholder of our company. There's no way a major shareholder could live in such an old apartment.
Major shareholder?
You must know the architect, Mr. Michael. So what? That's irrelevant now. Leave already. Michael is Emily's father. Huh? What are you saying? Michael is known worldwide, and he is said to work in a large mansion built on a vast piece of land in the mountains. This woman's father lives in a shabby apartment. That's just an old apartment he bought years ago. He usually works in the mountains and hardly ever comes out. Your lies won't work. Look at this. Cherry showed me a photograph on her smartphone, which made headlines when I was born. Upon seeing this, my mother-in-law's eyes widened in surprise. Oh my, is this baby you? You're Emily? Oh my, Did you enjoy ridiculing me? Money has nothing to do with marriage. If you don't have a genuine heart, you can't be a couple. What? Why didn't you tell me? Whether my parents are wealthy or not doesn't change who I am. I will never forget the insults you threw at me. Please don't say that. Unable to forgive everything that had happened, I suddenly talked back to my mother-in-law. You get allergies just from breathing the same air as poor people, right? At the marriage proposal, even though I was wearing a high-fashion dress designed by a famous designer, you said it looked cheap and poor. Marrying George is like a celebrity marrying a homeless person. The severance money you said you'd pay to break us up is worth just a single quarter, isn't it? Well, that's... You judge people based on your own selfish assumptions. Just because a family has money, anyone is fine. Such a barbaric way of thinking. Enough with your nonsense. Tears started to well up in my eyes out of frustration, and I didn't stop there. I heard about what you said from Cherry before our marriage. Moreover, my parents told me that happiness cannot be decided by money. It's your trustworthy partner. Trust in yourself.
Emily, knowing that, why did you still want to marry me?
I understand how you feel, mother-in-law. If you lose your parents, have no money, and have to be put in a facility, anyone would go crazy in that situation. That's why I wanted to deepen our familial bonds through marriage, to help heal your emotional wounds. I was even willing to live with you for that. I didn't know anything about you. I can't understand if you don't tell me. You insulted me before we could have that conversation. I was planning to keep this to myself, thinking of your hardship, but I couldn't bear it any longer. That's why I broke down crying. Then George hugs me gently.
Emily, I'm sorry. I should have understood you better. I should have protected you more. Emily, I'm really sorry. You're the only one for me. I believe in destiny, Emily. Thank you, Emily. We truly caused you a lot of trouble. I want to apologize as well. I'm so sorry.
Father-in-law, please don't apologize. You are a respectable man.
Thank you, Emily.
Although it was meant to be a celebratory meal for my father-in-law, it ended up like this, and I felt incredibly guilty. My mother-in-law lost her ground and left the scene hastily. No one went after her. It seemed she was later kicked out by my father-in-law, agreed to divorce, and left the house. Without any family to rely on, my mother-in-law probably had to start her life all over again from scratch. It must have been a hard start. I was worried about my father-in-law, so I decided to live with him at his house and quit my job. Most importantly, I was happy to be pregnant, and in just another 6 months, I'll be a parent. My father-in-law was overjoyed, and we called Cherry to celebrate. I feel so fortunate to be able to raise a child surrounded by a loving family. George, we have to work harder for the child that will be born to us.